So that's just a little tidbit about that. So here's probably one of the more. Now we're going to head into those first couple of slides were build-up slides. Now we're going to head into the Shia versus Sunni rival conflict. Again, you have to know the history to understand why as I mentioned several minutes ago now, you have the Sunni Muslims in Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia is the HQ for the Sunni Muslims, and the Shiite Muslims are in Persia / the Islamic Republic. This goes all the way back in their religion to Muhammad, their main prophet, their messiah, their central figure they look up to. Is the Sunni Muslims believe that Muhammad, companion Abu, should lead the religion, should lead the people that follow the religion, but the Shiites believe that Muhammad, the bloodline and the succession line, should stay within the family, and supported Ali, the cousin and son-in-law to Muhammad. Several years later, Ali was assassinated, and as of now today, Sunni Muslims make up around 85 to 90% of the world's population. As I've said, Saudi Arabia is the Sunni powerhouse of the country, and Shiite Muslims are 10 to 15% of worldwide Muslims, and Iran is the Shiite powerhouse. So already, just a couple things for you to think about is that I've identified already that there's a belief system for these people. We're 8 slides in, 7 slides in. One slide was the title slide. So within 7 slides, you've already realized this country has some kind of cultural identity. Again, another big-time rivalry. Arabs versus Persians. The lady in that man on the street interview said the current regime is occupied by Arabs. She has no idea what the hell is this current government in Iran, does not want anything to do with it. Let's go back to the Islamic conquest of Persia. The Persians saw Arabs as conquerors, right? The Persians kind of wanted to defend, right? And Iran eventually became the Shiite Muslim powerhouse, unlike most Arab Sunni states. And if you've listened to some of the episodes that I have done on Hezbollah and the Houthis and other groups, other proxy groups, is that the Shiite populations had to battle through a lot, in all honesty, to get to where they are today. Persians speak Farsi as well, not Arabic. And Iran is Persia, Saudi Arabia Arab, as the regional power rivals compete over Shiite versus Sunni rivalry. The politics, so you have the axis of resistance, which is the Popular Mobilization Force in Iraq, Shiite militias in Syria, the Houthis in Yemen, Hezbollah in Lebanon, and Iran, and the Revolutionary Guard within Iran as well. So, and as we saw, the Sunnis are much more aligned with the West, because if we're talking about human rights, remember, I think it was 2018, Jamal Khashoggi, that Washington Post journalist, was chopped up into a gazillion pieces, and the United States looked the other way. They did not really, there was no severe consequences on the Saudis, really, right? The Saudis, they were kind of caught red-handed, so they had to send in, I can't remember the fellow's name. He got his college education at North Texas University. He's Western educated. Here, I'm gonna try pull him up real quickly on the monitor here. However, they send this particular individual out from the kingdom. He was also, when King Abdullah was king of Saudi Arabia, he was the point guy to talk to Western media. Sorry, 1 second. His name is, I'll kind of find it here in the next few, Saudi Arabia. We'll find that in a moment. Yeah, that's not super important right now. Okay, I'll just kind of continue. But however, the main point is that the Saudis have somebody to run point for them on the media, and as well that that the Saudis were able to commit such an act like that, and nothing really happened, right? So just kind of keep that in mind for as we discuss further build-up. Okay, so around 700 CE, you have this Islamic conquest occurs throughout the region. Arab Muslim armies conquer the Caesarian Empire. There's this the Twelver Shiism state religion. The Twelver Shiite Islam is one of the more important things that you should remember for what's currently happening right now. Is that it's a huge modern Islamic identity for the country, or almost to 1900, right? So the Qajar dynasty, some modernization attempts. However, the rule was marked by foreign meddling. Russia, Britain really kind of pulled the strings. There was some maybe more Western ideals presented by the Constitutional Revolution, established parliament and limits. It kind of crippled the monarchy a little bit, but there were some seeds of nationalism and anti-colonial sentiment. So not a huge deal here. Okay, so now I know this is a little tough to see. I just want to remind everybody I didn't make any edits to this original PowerPoint. So I'll read the bullets in full for this slide. So you have the Anglo-Russian Convention. You can kind of see on the slide on the image in the background is you have the southern portion of the country the British had control over, and the northern part was the Russian sphere. The center part was the center sector, I should say rather, had some influence among both regions. However, neither country claimed outright control. However, the major takeaway is that Iran felt like their sovereignty was violated by this, a major no-no, and it fueled nationalism again. So now I've talked about a couple of times, nationalism, it's a common belief among the population. It's something to believe in. Allowed British influence over control in the Persian Gulf. Now here's where we're discussing this is the regime right before the current regime, essentially. The last monarchy. The last Shahs of Persia, Reza Pahlavi, and the Pahlavi era from 1925 and 1979. Reza Shah focused on centralization, had actually instead, so in the current regime is that women, it's forced hijab laws. In the past, in the prior monarchy, is that it was forced Western dress code, essentially. And we'll discuss that here in a few minutes. However, Mohammad Reza Shah, the White Revolution, some land reforms, women's suffrage, rapid modernization. In the 1950s, we saw this with the Shah out of power, Operation Ajax, and there's a whole slide on that as well. So this era led to why this current regime is in power. If there's any takeaway from the entire night, these next couple of slides are what you need to understand the most. I'd argue, honestly. There was rising clerical and populist opposition that set the stage for the 1979 Iranian Revolution. Reza Shah, okay, his big things were infrastructure, where I'm the Shah now. He was a former military guy, overthrew the Qajar dynasty, forced the Western dress code, banned the hijabs, and now for the first time since ever, it's instead of Persia, it's Iran. It's now not Islamic Republic then. However, it's still Iran, and he was an autocrat, an authoritarian, used his military background to rule aggressively through the Persian Cossack brigade, had secret police such as the Savik. We'll talk about those guys here in a little bit too. And any press that was against him was silenced or killed off. So that's just a little something to know about Reza Shah. Now, so when I made this, Ali Khamenei was still alive. He was still the incumbent supreme leader. So I really want to so you guys can understand a little bit more about why he was the supreme leader, began his tenure in 1989, and held that position until just a couple of days ago. So I want you guys to understand the historical significance behind this one human being within a country's history and population, as well as influence. Born in 1939, son of a cleric, educated in traditional seminaries, and he studied, and his personal mentor, he studied under Ruhollah Khomeini, who was the first supreme leader of Iran, the first Ayatollah, the only other supreme leader other than Khamenei ever in the country's history. And to overthrow the Savak and the Reza Pahlavi's regime, he had to hide underground in the 60s and the 70s. He was jailed on multiple occasions for protesting the monarchy and the Shah. He was a power player within the revolution, however. He was a critical part in helping, which is why the regime trusted him to be the supreme leader once his turn came in 1989. He survived, and I'm not sure if you ever watched him speak or watched him walk around in public. You'd always notice he had a little sling, a little cast on about right here, and he'd always wave with his left hand because his right arm was paralyzed. He almost died in 1981 and was paralyzed, and his right arm, his right hand couldn't move it. So that also was the regime used that paralyzation fact to say, hey, Khamenei, he almost died for you, so you should remain loyal to him. And he built a reputation as a cleric, and he was a veteran of the Iran-Iraq War, which we will discuss here later. So he had a strong resume for the Islamic Republic. He was a figure that the regime trusted him with, for sure. Okay, he's born just 2 years before this, so we're not really thinking about him right now. Let's go to the Anglo-Soviet invasion of Iran. The Second World War has begun. It's in full swing, where we know the big power players for this conflict, and Iran declared neutrality, right? Reza Shah is still the head of state at this time. However, Western powers, even though Iran was neutral, had a glaring suspicion that Reza Shah might have been in the pocket of the Austrian painter and other German Nazi regime personnel. That the West, as you'll learn in Operation Ajax, the West does not like these Middle Eastern countries having complete sovereignty over over their oil refineries, having absolute sovereignty and control over water ports. So on August 25th, 1941, Britain invaded from the south, Soviet Union invaded from the north. As we discussed in the Anglo-Saxon deal a couple of slides ago, you already had that map set up. You already had the borders and the timeline essentially ready to go, and the Iranian army stood no match. It was less than a day, I believe. The country surrendered, and we're aligned with the Soviets at this time, and Reza Shah, they were kind to him. They said, you can respectfully resign, or we're going to kill you or torture you. And he was tossed. So Reza Shah, he's gone. He's tossed from the throne, ending his reign as the monarch. Just a couple years later, you have one of the most important and maybe more recognizable photos in World War II history is at the 1943 Tehran Conference between Stalin, Roosevelt, and Churchill. In Iran, their sovereignty was violated. They were occupied. They had no control over. So the Shah's son was officially the monarch of the country. However, we were like, okay, you're not going to do anything, and he was essentially put in timeout in the corner, was a worthless head of state at that moment. So I thought a cool little fact is that D-Day was planned during this conference. So just something to Iran has a lot of history in it, and even when their personnel is maybe not necessarily involved, huge historical events have been planned within the nation's borders. The last Shah, right? Reza Shah, he's tossed, he loses the throne. However, Reza Pahlavi, he has one more crack at it. After the Second World War, he's thrusted back into power in Tehran, and heavily through heavy backing of Western powers, implements Western culture. The White Revolution of 1963 occurs under the last Shah. But now, remember, you have people like Rollo Khomeini and Ali Khamenei that are in the shadows looking at all of this through their teachings. Remember, Khamenei, born to a cleric. Pahlavi exiled future supreme leaders, Khomeini and Khamenei. Khamenei was sent to a more rural part of Iran. Khomeini, for the majority of his 14-year exile, I believe, was sent to France. That's where he spent most of his time. However, in terms of Western ideals, women were granted the right to vote, no more forced dress code, and this no more hijab dress code that was forced. However, it did spark a rivalry with Ruhollah Khomeini, another figure that is critically important in Iranian history. That's just a little background on the last Shah. However, we need to look at democracy was implemented for a period of time in Iran. After Prime Minister Mohammad Mossadegh was elected, he was tossed and overthrown by the CIA and MI6, which is British intelligence. He was removed from his head of state, not head of state, but essentially he was the head of state, right? Why did this happen? Nationalized Iran's oil, which, if you go back to the Anglo-Saxon Convention, remember the Soviets and the British, they occupied the oil, so that really upset major Western power in the country. Yeah, the British were not particularly excited, but Iranian nationalism rises. His popularity surges, and he's actually named the 1951 Time Person of the Year. Nowadays, it's always the President of the United States every year, or after every election they win, or another, maybe it's Taylor Swift or somebody like that. However, in 1951, Mohammad Mossadegh was elected, he was awarded the Time Person of the Year due to his efforts for Iranian nationalism, and the Shah backed down, right? He was no match to this at all. Operation Ajax happens, to where he's removed from the head of state. And again, I've mentioned that this is probably the third or fourth time now. This is a nationalism thing. It fueled anti-Western ideology once again. Another reason to be wary of the West. Let's go a little further into the White Revolution of 1963 in Iran. Deemed to be a white revolution because when we think of maybe the American Revolution, other revolutions, that there's people that are killed or need to be violently removed or eliminated or something of that matter. However, this was a Western liberation revolution, more or less. Peasants were given land, schools and rural areas were constructed, women were able to vote, and the dress code was much better, right? It was not such oppression. The traditionalists were not, like Ruhollah Khomeini and Ali Khamenei, were not thrilled to see this by any means, and it really kind of sparked the flame in Khomeini's head that said, enough, never again, or I'm sick of seeing this. Women in Iran. There are some photos. If you go Google it after this presentation, go to Google Images and Google Iranian women 1950, and you'll see they're in bikinis. They're looking particularly beautiful. They're looking nice, and you could mistake that for an image of women in 2026. Outside of the beach in Panama City Beach, Florida, or Los Angeles, California, in the summertime. Something like that. So it's a whole different culture that the Shah had under, again, an identity thing. And they could run for office. They could run for the parliament. They were allowed to seek government positions. Now they were able to go to school, go to college. They were working much more active in public life than current day. And after the 1979 Iranian Revolution, the hijab laws returned. Okay? So that's just something about the women, right? We see now I should say deceased Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei, one of his last public appearances, I believe maybe 4 months ago, it was with exclusively a bunch of Iranian women stating that women should be like a flower, but once they're seed, give them some water and they'll sprout like a flower. So even the propaganda within the regime still wanted to show women that were supported, right? And all of the women, if you watch the video, I watched the video. If you watch the video when Khamenei was speaking, giving his remarks, all of the women wearing the hijab still, right? So still a cultural thing there. Ruhollah Khomeini deserves his own slide because he's Iran's, I'd argue, George Washington, essentially. Or the current regime's George Washington, I should say. The first supreme leader, the inaugural office holder, was a big-time power player within the revolution to toss and remove the Shah from power, and he led for just slightly under 10 years and was exiled for 14 years, a majority of the time spent in France due to his vocal opposition against the Shah and the monarchy. However, I don't want to paint it that he's some innocent guy. He did order for mass executions of political prisoners, and lied about promising freedom to the Iranian people, right? So, again, he was, you can argue, treated unfairly, right? He was exiled for a time, but did not necessarily return the favor by any means in the future. So, a critically important figure for you to understand. If you look at, I think he's on the plane. I believe 60 News is 60 Minutes, excuse me, not 60 News. 60 Minutes is talking to him, and some people online, I can't remember his exact quote, but he essentially had a mentality of, I'm coming back for Iran, the Islamic Republic. We're going to rise up and do our own thing. We've been under the thumb of the West for far too long. It's our turn to do our deal. And here's where you get the end of the Shah. The Reza Pahlavi, the SAVAK, the regime's secret police is not able to maintain and control the population. It's overwhelmed. And again, the Shah, something when I see online, people are like, oh, we need to free the Iranian people, we need to get the Shah back. They weren't particularly free before either. They were still, if they went against the government, they were punished, they were killed, they were jailed, imprisoned, exiled even. So when you're hearing about free Iran, we need to free Iran. Fine, yeah, I'm not advocating for the continuation of the current regime. It's just, now that you know Iran's history, is that they weren't particularly free before either. And clerical figures like Ruhollah Khomeini and Ali Khamenei, they are elevated at a rapid rate. However, the Shah, he does have he has cancer. He goes to Maryland for medical treatment to seek treatment for his diagnosis. His disease, it progresses quickly. He dies a year later in Egypt, I believe. He doesn't live much longer after he's removed as the Shah. And this does mark a civilizational milestone for Persia, is that the 2,500 years of kingship in Persia it's concluded, at least for the time being, I should say. On the other side of the tarmac, here comes Ruhollah Khomeini. The mass protests and the clergy-led movement end the Shah. The Shah, he's done. He has to seek treatment for his cancer diagnosis, and he declares the Islamic Republic. He declares himself the supreme leader a short period of time later, and implements a theocracy, planet Earth's only theocracy to the state. The hostage crisis is seen as a payback to Western pain and troubles. Let's go right to that hostage crisis, as I want to mention there. These revolutionary students are seized at the embassy in Tehran. A little over 50 diplomats and citizens are held hostage for 444 days. And remember, the exiled Shah, he's got cancer. He's got to bail town. The mullahs and regime supporters, it's seen as a retaliation for overthrowing Mohammad Mossadegh during Operation Ajax in 1953, and now this is the beginning of the end for any United States and Iranian relations on a diplomatic level, a true diplomatic level, I should say. And now it's just again, this is now the fifth or sixth time I've mentioned this. Iranian nationalism, a common belief in something. Iran-Contra in the mid-'80s. I remember when I was a student in high school, in my freshman year history class, everyone had to pick a certain figure in history to make a poster board on, learn about. And my individual, looking back now, was Oliver North, the individual who exposed this scandal, the Iran-Contra scandal. The idea was to get the American hostages out of Lebanon that were held by the crown jewel proxy for the Iranian regime, Hezbollah. As we saw, they just recently entered the conflict with strikes against Israeli military infrastructure and personnel a few evenings ago in sidebar. Both countries denied involvement at the beginning of this, and it was an embarrassment to the Ronald Reagan administration. It damaged the credibility, like, what's going on here? So, and again, like, it was a secret that the government didn't want you to know about, and now it was just exposed because of Oliver North. And even though in public both countries talked tough against each other, they were still in discussions. So a big deal there. As I mentioned a few slides ago, Ali Khamenei was a veteran in this conflict. He served in this conflict. Saddam Hussein and Iraq invaded Iran. Hussein thought with a brand new regime, a brand new government, that Iran would be particularly weak and maybe pliable to be overthrown or to seek regime change within the republic. It was Khomeini's first full year as supreme leader, and it was an 8-year-long war of attrition. A lot of people died of it, between 500,000 to 1 million total casualties. There was a lot of economic devastation. However, it galvanized the regime, and we see the IRGC, a major force that we're going to be talking about a lot further here tonight, the Revolutionary Guard. They gained this prominence. It's their first big test, and they succeed, more or less. And again, now this is the 6th to 7th time I've mentioned, Iran has a national identity. They have been attacked, and they defend themselves, actually. They ultimately, there is no regime change. They hold on. And it only fuels people that maybe were skeptics before to grow further in support of the Iranian government and the mullahs. Now let's go to part 2 of Where's Ali Khamenei? President of Iran, he was the 3rd president of Iran from 1981 to 1989, survived the 1981 assassination attempt, mentored by Ruhollah Khomeini, a big-time ally of the Islamic Republican Party. A huge role between the war's leadership and the post-revolutionary regime building. Was able to promote the Islamic ideology within critical institutions, important institutions. And after Ruhollah Khomeini, I believe Khomeini had 8 heart attacks in 8 days and died shortly after that. He was quickly appointed the 2nd supreme leader of the country. Now let's take, at least under this current regime, something now